Today on Building the Open Metaverse.
And Trials on Tatooine was just a tiny little experiment, but it really gave the picture of what immersive storytelling, or the beginnings of a picture of what immersive storytelling could do that's different than what you can do in film. A little light interaction, some fun game mechanics, but a lot of character and a lot of interactions that you would normally think of as movie-type interactions, but told in a different way.
Welcome to Building the Open Metaverse, where technology experts discuss how the community is building the open metaverse together. Hosted by Patrick Cozy from Cesium and Marc Petit from Epic Games.
So hello everybody and welcome to our show Building the Open Metaverse, the podcast where technologists share their insight on how the community is building the metaverse together. Hello, I am Marc Petit from Epic Games, and today I'm on my own as my co-host Patrick Cozy from Cesium could not make it today, and we did not want to delay today's recording as we have a great guest for you. And it's my immense pleasure to welcome Rob Bredow, the Senior Vice President and Chief Creative Officer at Industrial Light and Magic. Rob, welcome to the show. We're thrilled to have you with us today.
Thanks for having me. Fun to do.
Yeah, and I'll say a few things because I know you're too modest to say them yourself. So, you're a unique blend of artistry, creativity, as well as a technologist. And you're an Oscar nominee for your work on Solo, Star Wars Story, as a visual effects supervisor and producer. You are CTO of ILM and ImageWorks, important things. And you've been very involved with the visual effects community, a member of the Academy, and you are the chairman of the governing board of the Academy Software Foundation, which we know is leading key open source projects for the movie industry. So quite a pedigree, very impressive. And this being said, so I'd like, you to describe in your own words your journey through computer graphics and ultimately to the metaverse. So alternating between the very technological roles and being an artist, how did you do that?
Well, I kind of love everything around computer graphics and filmmaking. It's just such an interesting area, and there's so much innovation. I mean, since I've been in it, the first computer that I used was a Personal Iris 25, which is, that was a really beefy $250,000 workstation. And, today, of course, my iPhone has way more, it has more memory, it has more graphics power, it has more CPU than that machine could ever dream of having. It ran at 25 megahertz, which is just a completely different world than what we are dealing with today. So the amount of innovation and the amount of change that's happened in the industry has just been a lot of fun to keep up with, a lot of fun to learn and break new ground at each turn. And I really have enjoyed getting to keep one foot in the world of technology, because that's certainly what is so intrinsic to all of the work we create. And then tech for tech's sake just never always appealed to me. So the fact that we get to make pictures, tell stories, collaborate with people from all different backgrounds has been something that I've just always loved. So I truly learned the artistic and creative parts of the job at work with people who had graduated from Cal Arts and world-class artists and world-class storytellers that I've gotten to work with over the years. And I got getting to sit next to Ron Howard while he's directing Solo, a Star Wars story, and he was generous with his learning and his sharing. So you get to learn so much in this role. So I feel very, very fortunate to get to have had these experiences.
Yeah, learning is so critical. And so you mentioned, the evolution of the industry, and I think, when you think about Lucasfilm and the role of Lucasfilm in the industry, from, the invention of digital video editing to first creature of Jurassic Park to the invention of THX. I mean, it's been a source of innovation for the industry. And you guys did it again with virtual production, and stagecraft and your work on The Mandalorian. So how did this happen?
Yeah, getting to put up that first LED wall that was going to be used in an extensive way to create The Mandalorian was just a huge thrill. And we had been working on it and kind of laying the groundwork for that since before I arrived at Lucasfilm and ILM. I remember in my first week, I drew a drawing of what would it be like if we could do a whole room that was surrounding your LEDs, and you could take the HDRI sphere that we usually shoot on the set and you put it onto the LEDs and use that as a reshoot stage. And I drew these drawings and showed them around, and I wasn't certainly the first person who thought of that, but it was definitely a passion project to try to make that a reality, whether that was projectors or LED tech. And the technology wasn't quite there. I mean, as we were shooting Rogue One, we were really interested in this real-time technology, and we used some LEDs on the walls to do the illumination, but we needed to replace all that content. But I mean, I'm just very fortunate to work at a place where these experiments are willing to be jumped into even before the tech is ready. So as John Knoll, who was a visual effects supervisor, was working with Greg Fraser, the DP on Rogue One, and shooting these brilliant looking shots where all the backgrounds needed to be replaced, we had these walls available. So me and Tim Alexander flew out to London, and as they were wrapping those stages, we got a day on those stages to shoot a bunch of tests. Like, what if we could capture this stuff in camera finals? What would it look like? And we did all these color calibration tests and did all this work that was the work that led up eventually to giving us the ability to get in a room with Jon Favreau and say, he came with all of this virtual production experience, having just finished Lion King, knowing those tools inside and out, knowing what they could bring to live action filmmakers, but you weren't going to put VR headsets on your actors. Like, you're going to photograph your actors. So how can we bring that into the real world? So I was part of the team that was in the room pitching with him of options of how we could create this show. And when I showed him our LED tests that we had done, and when I talked about the kind of ambition we had for making this possible, he really lit up. And I mean, he had a vision for how that could change his show, how he could design his show around that, how he could shoot his show there in Manhattan Beach, but bring the whole world's locations, and of course the locations we already had in the library at the studio, to the soundstage in Manhattan Beach. And that was a risky decision. I mean, that's one of the things that we're very fortunate to have at Lucasfilm, and some of the filmmakers we work with at ILM. They're not very afraid. This could have gone badly, and there was a lot of nerves and there was a lot of hard work that had to happen to make this work the first time. There were as many engineers on set, I think, as the rest of the crew, right? There were engineers writing code on the side of set on the first days of those early days in The Mandalorian. Both people from Epic and people from ILM, all and other companies as well, working together just to make sure it held together long enough for that shoot. And now, since then, it was now quite a few years ago. Since then, it's actually a pretty production-hardened system that we've got up and running. But those first few times we're not guaranteed to be smooth.
All right, so let's switch. Let's stay on the topic of innovation and talk about a different topic. You soon after you joined ILM in 2014, you created ILM X Lab, and 2015. I don't know if you remember, but that was It was very early when it comes to interactive content and VR, and you worked on Trails on Tatooine, which was a real innovative piece using VR to tell stories. So tell us about XLab and how far you've been able to push that exploration into the world of interactive content.
Yeah, getting to create early immersive entertainment that was really story driven was just another one of those great opportunities. And I remember I wrote the first draft of Trials on Tatooine in the middle of a jet lag night sometime when I was in Europe working on. Actually, I think I was shooting the test we were just talking about from Rogue One, and I was jet lagged that night, and I'm like, I've got an idea, so I wrote this thing with the Millennium Falcon. Yeah, it was a good day. That's a good point. And I mean, the studio just got behind doing these experiments, and at the time we took our advanced development group. We didn't even have X Labs. It wasn't even named X Lab. It was the advanced development group and some of the team around it. It was a team of engineers and artists all working together to kind of push what the state of the art was, both in filmmaking tools for real time, but also in what people would experience at their houses. And Trials on Tatooine was just a tiny little experiment, but it really gave the picture of what immersive storytelling, or the beginnings of a picture of what that immersive storytelling could do that's different than what you can do in film. A little light interaction, some fun game mechanics, but a lot of character and a lot of interactions that you would normally think of as movie-type interactions, but told in a different way. And since then, XLab has just gotten to create more and more immersive experiences with amazing filmmakers, like we did Carne y Irina, which was ended up winning an Oscar for its innovative storytelling, a very powerful film, interactive cinema piece that was well recognized, and then many hours of virtual reality, story-based entertainment, from cartoony experiences like Ralph Breaks VR, a Avengers Damage Control is a location-based experience, about 15 minutes long, where you go through and you get to actually experience what it's like to be drafted into the Avengers. And then the Star Wars stories that have more recently been told with Vader Immortal, and the most recent one is Star Wars Tales from Galaxy's Edge. Those are multiple hours of Star Wars storytelling that take place, like Tales from Galaxy's Edge actually takes place with Galaxy's Edge, the location you can go to at Disneyland or Walt Disney World. That's the hub, and then you branch out of there to get all of these other immersive stories told, and you experience them firsthand. So it's been a lot of fun to learn so much about what that balance is between storytelling and gaming mechanics and all the other things that go into making these immersive experiences. And then from a technology perspective, it used to be that there was a long list of things you couldn't do in VR. And now, on a Quest 2, we can't do just anything we want, but we have characters, multiple real-time characters, very complicated environments, very complex storytelling environments that we can use to bring these stories to life. So we're really starting to see the beginning of this industry really becoming a reality.
So from a creative perspective, do you think we've cracked the code on mixing the agency of interactive content, and the art of storytelling? It looks to me like it's a wide field of experimentation, and you guys have done some, and you're not the only one, but there's not a lot of experimentation in mixing linear and interactive. So do you see potential there?
I do. There's a lot of potential there. I just got to experience Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, which is a 2-night experience at Walt Disney World. Have you heard about this or talked about it?
Well, we heard, we guessed what it could be, but the more, if you could describe it a little bit, I think it would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say anything that's not publicly available yet. It opens just in a couple of weeks, but it is, starting, I think it's March 1st. Anyone can book a seat on the Galactic Star Cruiser, and it is a 2-night immersive experience. You get to decide what kind of Star Wars character you want to be, or you can just stand back and have a nice drink at the lounge and play some sabacc and hang out and watch other people play. But if you do play, I mean, you're interacted with on your data pad, you're interacting with characters, they're sending you on missions, you're doing stuff all through the ship. There's a ground excursion to Batuu, Batuu is the Galaxy's Edge park, so there's a ground excursion. And, when I first was working on this experience, because at ILMX Lab helped to create all of some of the work that makes it immersive, all the screens that make the outside view of space and all that kind of work. When I was working on it, I had to be very intentional about using the right words. If I said the hotel, someone would correct me and say, it's not a hotel, it's a ship. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, mental model, I got to remember it's the ship. And I wondered if experiencing it in the situation, if you had to kind of play along, if you really had to work to suspend your disbelief, or if the illusion would be complete. And I got to say, I mean, this is all credit to the Imagineers and everyone who created this experience. You walk in there, and in the first 15 minutes, you go from thinking you were checking into a hotel, if you were, to you're on a ship. Every window you look at is space. You're welcomed at the captain's muster. I mean, it is like going on a cruise, except you're going on a cruise into space, and it's very high end. They provide a very, very high level of service, very nice meals, all that sort of stuff. So anyway, what made me start thinking about that was, you were asking about, immersive storytelling and all of the tough challenges to crack there. Because as people, we like to be told stories by expert storytellers, right? That is, we don't, the model of a choose your own adventure doesn't always generate a great story. And most people don't want to choose their own adventure. They want to be told a fantastic story. And some of the things we've experimented with and you've seen in some of our immersive experiences, and what the Imagineers and us together have done in Galactic Star Cruiser, there is a master storytelling telling you a story, but you do also get to interact with it. You get to interact with characters, you get to change moments along the way, even though there is an overarching narrative that is very satisfying, and you can just stand back and watch the whole thing and it's a really fun show, or you can get as involved as you want. And I think we're starting to see big plays like that in immersive entertainment. I think Galactic Star Cruiser is going to stand on its own. It's a pretty unique experience, but we're starting to see models where you really see this immersion really work.
Yeah, by the way, Patrick has got tickets already, and we tried to get Bei Young to come to the show, and we haven't had a chance to talk to Bei yet, but we wanted to hear about that experience, so glad. Thanks for sharing, being generous and sharing some of this with us. So tell us about the intersection, because the traditional VFX pipeline, the virtual production pipeline, and the work of ILM Lab, are you able to deliver on that dream of sharing assets across, multimedia properties? What's the state of the art there, and what can we expect?
Yeah, we fortunately have a long roadmap and have been able to deliver on some of that promise. So over 10 years ago, the decision was made when we knew we were going to have 10 years of Star Wars films in a row. It made sense to invest in a library and a way of storing our assets that was going to be reusable over time. And we settled on some formats. Alembic, we've actually translated most of that stuff to USD now. We created Material X, which is open source and is more widely used now, but that was initially created in part to give us this translation layer so that no matter whether an artist was using tool A or tool B to create the asset, we would have an interchangeable way of describing the geometry, the textures, and the materials that would stand the test of time. So you can take an X-Wing from Episode 7, which was the first one that was done with the unified asset specification that we laid out, and you can drop it into one of our shows. And the way I like to describe it is the water that was streaking down by the windows, that extra effect, that we don't bother trying to standardize. That's done. That's a one-off. But all the rest of the materials, the paint, colors, how metal the materials are, how they reflect the light, how the specular lobes work. Those all work the same in our system from Episode 7 to today, which, I've been at a few different places over my life. I've never experienced that sort of continuity of library and the value that that's brought to the organization. And that's true whether we're talking about a game that we're doing with a partner like Electronic Arts, whether we're talking about the work that's being done at ILM or ILM Lab for immersive entertainment. So that's been really important, especially as we get into doing work inside of stagecraft on our LED stages. The virtual art department is almost always done these days in Unreal, but there's other tools that get used in that pre-production process. We use a couple of different rendering techniques on the wall. Sometimes we're rendering to the wall with Unreal. Sometimes we're rendering to the wall with Helios. And we need to make sure we have the same high fidelity experience and the full interchange of data between all the different tools that our artists want to use.
Yeah, it's quite a feat. I mean, it looks like, the dream is coming true. I mean, as you said, it's 10 years worth of work, and thanks to your contribution, and we'll segue into the open source conversation. I think you specifically as an individual and ILM has been contributing a lot so that the rest of the industry can also benefit from all of that. So. So throughout your career, you've been a proponent of open source. Even you were at the origin of Alembic, right?
Yeah. It was when I was at Sony, and I was collaborating with Richard and the team at ILM, and we teamed up to create Alembic.
Yeah, I remember that. It was a very interesting moment because it was the first time, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but for me, I remember it was the first time when competitors would actually start collaborating for the advancement of the industry, and I think it was a great thing to see happen. So
it was interesting because we both caught wind. It was actually I think it was in a meeting you organized when you were at Autodesk. We both realized that ILM was working on something that they thought might become an open source standard for geometry representation, and Sony was as well. And we both realized how silly would it be if there was two competing open source standards for geometry storage out there in the marketplace? And a quick conversation, we realized it was gonna be better for both of us if we teamed up to create one solution that would be useful for everyone. And Alembic really took off once we had that finished and ready to go and share with the market. Although now, before there wasn't really a centralized body that was facilitating that. So fortunately, there were great teams out there at Autodesk and other places that would facilitate these conversations, and eventually you'd have these side conversations where these kind of things could be discovered. Now with the Academy Software Foundation, there's actually a forum where you can find out what's going on with other people's ambitions in the open source space and hopefully keep that more coordinated to keep the efforts as efficient as possible.
Yeah, no, that was a great achievement because we had Project Pop-Up live up and almost die, in the industry because of people moving on from job to job. And so, and you were the origin of the Academy Software Foundation, right? It's a fair thing to say, convincing the Academy to provide infrastructure in the Linux Foundation, to put life into some projects and also to coordinate the industry.
Yeah, it was my project that I was chairing as a member of the SciTech Council at the Academy. And to be honest, I might have been one of the most skeptical people that the right place to solve this was going to be inside the Academy, because it needed to be fast-moving and innovative, and it needed to be very free-form and unstructured, because that's I felt the most successful open source development happens when it's really engineer-powered. But as the more we looked into it, the more we realized that a foundation that would solve some of the problems of licensing and help coordinate the version challenges and help provide a centralized resource for legal and all the other requirements around open source, it could be really efficient for the industry. And then the Academy knew its biggest contribution to this could be the gathering of people and the people that want to participate in what the Academy represents, which is that top quality filmmaking and that kind of storytelling. And I think one of the key moments for me was when we met with the Linux Foundation, and they came in and they were they had a system set up to partner with industry to solve these problems. So then it could be branded as a collaboration, and it is a collaboration between the Academy and the Linux Foundation, and then operated by the Linux Foundation, who they make Linux, they make hundreds of other open source projects, and they're very successful at organizing open source project collaboration. So now on any Academy Software Foundation project, you can just go in, check in a change, test the code, add the documentation, and it can be in the next release with very little overhead, which is miles and miles away from where we used to be.
Yeah, and absolutely. We had Royal O'Brien from O3D project, which also share the Linux Foundation infrastructure, and I think we cannot underestimate the importance of having this infrastructure and this knowledge and the way you run the technology groups and empowering the engineers, really. So that's kudos to the Linux Foundation. They created a really good model right there. So
yeah, it's been fantastic, and I've learned so much from their processes and procedures. And then, of course, we have incredible support from industry. We have more than 25 sponsoring companies, including both of the companies we work for, who are represented on that governing board, who put effort in and contribute engineering hours to these projects. So when a project comes into the Academy Software Foundation, it's not just, hey, it has a place to be hosted. There's lots of places you can go for that. But there's engineers from the industry who are going to be spending time on those projects, in addition to anyone else who wants to volunteer time. But both of our companies pay people to work on these projects, which is a superpower to be able to do that.
Yeah, and actually this makes me, one of the reasons we do this podcast, and we see the metaverse happening, the extension of the internet to this technology we've been working on for the past 20 years. And I know, because of the work we've done together, the Autodesk CTO Council or the Academy Software Foundation, that there is a true appetite for the industry to come together and work together at the technology level. I mean, business models, there's other consideration always, but it makes me very optimistic to even start on this endeavor. We're working with the Kronos organization, with the Academy Software Foundation, with David, to try to advance, around USD and GLTF and coordinate between open standards and open source. But I do believe that there is a real appetite for the people of the industry to come together and create an open metaverse. So tell me what, so you guys have been using USD. You've been proposing Material X as extensions to USD. So what, we had our friends from NVIDIA on the show saying, hey, it's going to be the HTML of the metaverse. And so do you share that optimism? Do you think we can get there?
Well, there is no better platform, I think, for the kinds of things we all want to create than USD. I mean, it's designed for high complexity. It's designed for multiple users to layer their work on top of other users, which is how we're going to build complicated environments and do complicated storytelling in worlds that we will create, whether you call them metaverse or not. That sort of experience going forward, absolutely, those kind of immersive experiences. And I don't think there's any major company that's working in computer graphics and entertainment who doesn't see USD as the next step, right? It encapsulates so many of the workflows that are so essential for how we're going to create and express and share our assets. I mean, just the fact that On an iPhone, if you fire off a scan of geometry, which you can do so easily on this device, and you send it off via messages, that's going through USD right now. That kind of adoption you only see when we've seen that with EXR, where on your desktop on a Mac, if you drop an EXR there and hit space, you actually get a preview of the EXR that's perfectly accurate. You see that with USD. I think those are indicators of how important and prevalent it's going to be for the future, where geometry and worlds that we've built are going to be a really important way to express storytelling. And they already are, for sure. But this language is going to be a very, very good language for us to communicate highly complicated scenes.
Yeah, so we're using it to have static declaration of the scenes, albeit very complex. How do we get from there to a fully simulated world, in your opinion? What are the steps that you, in your mind, that, what's, in the crawl, walk, run, fly model, what's next? What should we tackle next as a group to advance toward fully simulated worlds?
To me, the first part is actually before fully simulated, right? It's the full workflows behind those static representations. And we're close, but we're not there yet. What we don't have right now that I think we all want is a software agnostic interchange that does a nice job describing the concise changes that were made in one application versus another on a complicated scene. We're all pretty good about dumping USD out now, but you end up with a big USD file and you don't get just the changes that happened. And it's not a trivial job just to be able to author and tweak the kind of changes you want to make and then layer those back onto a USD file. So that's a step one. Then where do we go from there in terms of being able to actually encode an expressive character? I mean, there's certainly no limit to the kind of data USD can store, but the real trick is, when do we standardize what, right? Because I think we all know what it takes to move a video game character around because the GPUs are optimized a certain way. So we could standardize and say, like, hey, you can move a character around, and here's a way to describe bones, and here's a way to describe point weighting, and the GPUs can deform this in real time, so that's a useful standard to put into USD, which will get you part of the way there. But then when you want to do clothes, and when you want to do other things on top of that, or you want to do eyes with articulating lids, like, none of that is going to be able to be captured articulately with just those controls. So what are the things we choose to standardize, and what are the things we intentionally choose to wait on, letting industry innovate, and try 50 iterations until we all kind of converge on the same things. So I see we've converged on a lot of workflows, layering of edits on top of complicated scenes. I don't think we've quite converged. I mean, Epic just put out that amazing Matrix experience where you have all this complexity. There was a ton of innovation that went into creating that. New ways of doing level of detail, new ways of representing characters, new ways of creating these really dynamic and large worlds. My guess is, if Epic were to redo that today with everything they just learned, I'll bet there's all sorts of innovations that are going to go into that next generation. So the question is, when do we standardize, and when do we continue to innovate? And I'm guessing we're in an innovation cycle as it relates to characters and interchange of characters for a while still, as it relates to both real-time and film asset creation. Yeah, no,
I agree. And I think, for me, a lot of that is going to be at least a 10-year journey. I mean, just to set expectations, we're not going to figure things out overnight. And one thing we've always come back on those conversations is experimenting in the open, so that everybody learns from people's experimentation. And let's try to create those forums, those places when we can experiment in the open. I think it's interesting to see, the benefits and the parallel of having an open standard like GLTF, which doesn't prescribe an implementation, and those standards usually come after the fact to rubber stamp, what works, and to drive the commoditization and have as an open source project, we can be places to drive innovation and to experiment in the open. So it's one of our, one of the things an idea we promote here is trying to keep those two in locksteps and making sure that in the process of developing, around USD and around GLTF, we drive some level of synchronization between the two. And so that the solution that, at the end, we don't end up with widely different solutions. But both serve a different purpose, and we'll have a different journey, hopefully, to get us to a proper place. So, do you have any view on open standards and, how we should go about those?
I think I'm with you, or at least the way I understand what you're describing, which is there's a time for standardization once you're an expert, and when there's a few different ways of doing things, but they're all basically doing the same thing, just different ways. And that's the time where standardization is your best friend. And there's a time for the innovation phase, which we're seeing in a lot of what we're all seeing right now, where you barely have time to write down what you're doing. But if you're able to, and I think this is where efforts like what the Academy Software Foundation is doing and others who are working in an open and collaborative way, like what Pixar is doing with USD, working in the open so that people are seeing this innovation. And then, like you're sharing, the best practices will absolutely rise to the top. And if somebody else can do it better, everyone's going to see that if it's done in the open and say, oh, that's a way better way to do that. It's probably worth changing our system to accommodate that. And I think that's where the open source workflows, whether that's all in software, like it is in USD, or whether there's other kinds of open sharing. It's not just about software. It can be about assets and the way assets are stored, or the way the hierarchies of assets are stored, or their tags, or those kind of things. All those kind of workflows are really valuable for us to share. And sometimes that can be really formalized check-in processes. Sometimes it can just be, here's something we learned on the last show, which ILM's had a long history of doing at events like SIGGRAPH and at View Conference and other places. At FMX every year, like, here's some of the things we learned on these shows, which is an effort to, selfishly, it's an effort to recruit other people that are like-minded to us, but secondarily, it's an effort to really push the industry forward, right? Because we want to see everybody continue to advance in the industry, and we want to recruit the best people in the world to come work.
Thanks for being honest about it.
Yeah, it's both. It's not just because we're so nice.
No, look, it's fascinating to see the level of collaboration in the industry. I think it's also because it's a relatively small industry, and we know that what goes around comes around, and we better all behave.
Right. That's right. For sure.
Yeah. Well. So. Yeah. Thank you for that. I think it's. The conversation around USD is really one of the topic we cover at every episode on the podcast. And you're right that everybody is an important part of the future, and we're looking forward to Material X is something that I think we all need, and I think the path seems to be clear now on adopting that. So it's really great news for the industry. So. Thank you for that. So is there any other theme or topics that, we should cover, or we should have covered today during this conversation? Something that seems important to you?
Well, one of the things I'm interested in, but it's, definitely a topic for probably a whole nother podcast, is, the future of procedural assets, both like in movement and in style. So like, if we're building the metaverse and I want to sell you a lightsaber in Vader Immortal, or you earned a lightsaber in Vader Immortal, and we would like that to show up in Fortnite because we have an agreement and we're building the metaverse where assets are going to be interchanged between these two. And like the NFT component aside, there's just different looks and different attributes that are relevant for both of those. And my question is like whether that's clearly the future, whether we're going to have a style layer that is going to say like, here's the Fortnite style, it's going to go in this lightsaber, and here's the Vader Immortal style. Yeah, exactly, like a style sheet for lightsabers or for anything. Or is that just a complete pipe dream? Are we ever going to have procedural assets that are at that level? And I do think, one of the reasons proceduralism hasn't taken off in visual effects production is because, and it has in certain areas, like no one models a tree by hand anymore, right? We have systems that help us model beautiful trees. There would be no reason to model every leaf and put it on a tree, although I did that when I built my first pine tree, when I started, but now we have systems that build those for us. But we still build our walls by hand. And then when you find out that the Hulk is going to bust through that wall, you have to put the 2x4s in, you have to put the different layers, you have to define all those things, and then the Hulk can bust through it. But you have to simulate those, sometimes at once, sometimes separately, depending on your system. You're still doing a lot by hand. We build a lot of walls, we build a lot of hallways, a lot of things that are that require a lot of investment to create a completely procedural system that understands the architecture behind this. But how powerful would it be if you had a system that knew that, and you could say like, oh, I'm designing something from the 1600s. No, I'm designing something that was built in 1980, so it's all stucco, in California. I'm designing something that's built in 2020 with the latest things, and it knows how to whether to put metal 2x4s or wood 2x4s in, based on the construction style. Today, we actually have companies like Epic, companies that like Facebook, that are putting in the kind of money that can make these procedural systems possible. It was really hard to do that when you're just doing one show at a time. You got, a lot of work to do. You're never going to have time to sit back and say, wouldn't it be more efficient if I made a system that could build all the walls for me for the next 10 years? But I do see opportunities for these systems and a large enough audience. It's not a relatively small community of, tens of thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of visual effects artists. Now it's millions of makers who are going to be creating things for these worlds. So yeah, I'm very interested in that whole space.
Yeah, when Kim was on the show a few weeks ago, we talked about the importance of simulation and how simulation, can be put to the service of a movie making. He took some example of The Matrix Awakens, but I think you're also referring to a lot of the work we've seen from NVIDIA on style transfer, or even on stylization. I mean, teaching a machine about how Monet or how Gauguin are drawing and being able to reproduce that. So do you believe that this concept of augmented artistry is something that can really happen, or people would just want to create it by hand because it's going to be better?
Oh, I think both. I think once the machine learning based techniques become a useful artist assistant tool, there's no question those are going to be valuable. And if you could paint over, if you had a brush that was going to do the style transfer, and you could determine the strength and like how much Monet and how much of each style you're dialing into that brush, and you paint it on, and you're like, oh, I need a little bit more Monet over here, and I need a little bit more of this here, and you have a controllable system in which to apply that. I think artists will absolutely use those brushes to create. And what I'm not clear on is if there will ever be the automated translator that translates the Fortnite asset into the whatever the other system is. That might be a pipe dream, but maybe there will be tools to make it manageable enough. And if it's user generated or user enhanced, maybe that will be the way we get to an interchange. But that's an interesting topic, and I definitely don't have the answer.
Yeah, no, definitely something we should. We're going to have Mark Sager and Vladimir Mastilovic talk about digital human, and I think it's interesting to see how they're using 4D capture and machine learning to actually assist the process of creation of plausible human. So I think there is probably an angle there. But yeah, very good point. Well, thank you for that. And finally, is there a specific person or organization or institution that you would like to give a shout out to today?
Well, we've talked about Academy Software Foundation, so I'll plug the website. It's aswf.io. Anybody can go and participate. Sign up if your company isn't already a member. Encourage their company to get in touch with us and become a member, because you can access all the software without becoming a member, but it doesn't exist without our sponsoring entities. So thanks to all of them who participate. Just a random shout out to a guy named Sam Zeloff, whom I don't know. But I read an interesting article on Wired about him. He's building integrated IC chips in his parents' garage. He's like a 22-year-old guy, and he's building them from first principles. He started with the simplest, and is basically recreating what happened in the 50s and 60s and 70s, decade by decade in his garage, which I don't know anything about making IC chips, but experts say it should be impossible to do what he did. But he's getting thrown off hardware, fixing it up, and then actually creating IC chips in his garage, which is actually kind of amazing. So I thought it was an interesting article.
Thanks for pointing it out. I'll check it out for sure. So, Rob, thank you so much for your time and your generosity. I think it was a very enlightening conversation. I'm sure, ILM and Lucasfilm are keeping you very busy, so we very much appreciate the time you spent with us today. And to our audience, thank you so much. We're lucky we got good speakers, so the podcast is pretty popular. We hear good feedback, so keep us giving us the feedback. Tell us what you want to hear. So, Rob, again, thank you for being with us today. Patrick was with us in spirit. He will do this Star Wars ship experience for sure, and I'll try to make it myself as soon as possible. Rob, thank you again, and bye, everybody.